Hello everyone, Professor Kruzluk here. So, over the past several days, the United States and Israel have launched significant military strikes against Iran. On Sunday morning talk shows this morning, administration officials have came out and given their justifications for the strikes targeting the Iranian government. And within these ideas, within these discussions about why the Iranian government was attacked, why Israel and the US did attacks against Iran, is a general understanding and general argument that a different political system could potentially reshape the regional security environment if Iran wasn't hostile towards the US, wasn't hostile towards Israel. So this raises an important analytical question that really ties in with political science and international relations theory. And it all is rooted in the seemingly simple question of why would the United States and Israel want Iran to be democratic? So in this video, I want to explore the question through the lens of international relations theory, particularly the democratic peace theory, and then situate it within a broader geopolitical realities of the era that we're in. So to understand why policymakers might prefer a democratic Iran. Again, if you're watching the Sunday shows and you heard Trump administration officials talking about the importance of the strike or why the U.S. should do a preemptive, the administration's words, a preemptive strike on Iran, it helps us to understand if we understand some of the political science, IR theories behind it, helps make sense of some of the things we're saying. So I want to start by explaining what democratic peace theory is. So something that if you're in an IR course, you will encounter democratic peace theory. If you're maybe in an introductory political science course, this is something that you've probably encountered. So the modern articulation of the theory is most closely associated with scholars like Doriot and Rosset, who built on Immanuel Kant's 1795 essay Perpetual Peace, where Kant argued that republics, so what we would now call liberal democracies, would be less likely to wage aggressive war against each other because citizens who bear the costs of war would be hesitant to support that military conflict. So modern democratic peace theory really has two mechanisms then. First is normative constraint. Democracies internalize norms of compromise, rule of law, negotiation, and peaceful dispute resolution. These norms govern domestic political competition, which includes things that we talk about in all political science courses of elections, legislative bargaining, judicial review. When democratic states interact with other democracies, they externalize these norms. They assume the other side is also operating with a framework of negotiation rather than coercion. And second is institutional constraint. Democratic leaders face elections. They are accountable to legislatures. They operate under media scrutiny. And importantly, war is costly in blood, in treasure, and political capital. Voters can punish leaders who initiate reckless or unnecessary conflicts. These audience costs theoretically make democratic leaders more cautious, particularly when confronting other democracies whose intentions can be clarified through diplomatic channels. So, empirically, the strongest claim of democratic peace theory is dialectic. Mature liberal democracies rarely, if ever, fight one another in full scale wars. But here is a key clarification that all textbooks arise. The theory does not claim that democracies are peaceful in general. Democracies have fought many wars, including preventive wars, colonial wars, and interventions, particularly against non-democratic states. So, democratic peace theory does not directly explain why the United States and Israel would strike Iran. However, this IR theory does provide a framework for understanding why policymakers might believe that a democratic Iran would pose a fundamentally different kind of long-term security environment in the Middle East. So, Iran today is not a liberal democracy. It is a hybrid theocratic authoritarian state. It has elections that are constrained by clerical oversight and significant limits on civil liberties. Observers of the news saw how protesters around Iran were treated when they were demanding some political rights, or in years past, demanding more rights for women. So, from the perspective of democratic peace theory, a democracy non-democracy pairing is historically more conflict prone than a democracy to democracy pairing. Democracies often view authoritarian regimes as opaque, unpredictable, and unconstrained by public accountability. So this does matter for several reasons. First, authoritarian regimes may not face the same institutional barriers to escalation. Leaders are not subject to competitive electoral turnover in the same way as democratic systems are. Political opposition may be suppressed or eliminated. Public opinion may not translate directly into policy constraints. Second, authoritarian systems can rely heavily on ideological narratives, revolutionary identity, regime survival, anti-foreign mobilization that reshape foreign policy in ways that are less tied to economic interdependence or voter preferences. And third, signaling becomes harder. In democratic systems, intentions are often debated publicly. In authoritarian systems, elite decision-making can be opaque, which increases uncertainty and mistrust. So from a structural standpoint, policymakers in Washington or Jerusalem might believe that a democratic Iran would be more predictable, more transparent, and more constrained. That belief aligns directly with democratic peace logic. So then let's move from theory to concrete strategic considerations. From Israel's perspective, Iran represents a long-term existential threat, particularly in light of nuclear development concerns and regional proxy networks. From the United States' perspective, Iran is a regional challenger whose capabilities could disrupt balance of power dynamics in the Middle East. If Iran were to become a consolidated democracy, the theory argues, several strategic shifts might plausibly occur. A democratic Iran would likely have greater media transparency and parliamentary debate over defense policy. Military decisions might face public scrutiny. Large-scale escalation could require broader political consensus. Public opinion in democratic states often prioritizes economic growth, social welfare, and domestic stability over sustained external confrontation. That does not eliminate the possibility of conflict, but it can shift incentive structures. Moreover, democratic states are often more deeply integrated into global economic institutions. Trade networks, investment flows, international regulatory regimes. Economic interdependence can raise the opportunity costs of confrontation. So the argument here is not that democracy guarantees peace. Rather, it changes the incentive structure in ways that may reduce aggressive acts from the autocrat. So, for Israel in particular, a democratic Iran might represent a transition from ideological hostility towards pragmatic statecraft. For the United States, it could represent a move from a revisionist challenger to a system partner. So, there is also broader regional dimensions. The Middle East has historically been characterized by regime insecurity, interstate rivalry, and fluctuating alliance structure. The U.S. security architecture in the region relies on partnerships with states that cooperate on counterterrorism, intelligence, and, of course, energy stability. A democratic Iran could, in theory, democratic peace theory, if we're looking at the theory, recalibrates its regional posture. It might reduce support for armed non-state actors. It might prioritize economic normalization over ideological export. It might seek reintegration into global financial institutions without sanction constraints. So, from a long-term grand strategy perspective, that would reduce the need for constant deterrence management. Again, this is an aspiration that we hear policymakers talking about, but it is not irrational from a theoretical standpoint. So, democracy promotion is full of powerful language in U.S. political discourse. It connects to national identity. It frames foreign policy as morally purposeful. It resonates with voters who see liberal governance as universally desirable. When leaders speak about empowering the Iranian people or about regime change, opening space for freedom, that language serves as a legitimization function. This does not necessarily mean the goal is insincere, but democracy language often performs dual roles: normative aspiration and political justification. So, when we look at has external forces led to democratic transitions? The empirical evidence there is a bit more complex. There is little consistent historical evidence that external military strikes reliably generate stable democratic transitions. Authoritarian regimes frequently use foreign attacks to consolidate domestic control. External pressure can trigger nationalist rally around the flag effects. Opposition movements can be delegitimized as foreign collaborators. So, democratic consolidation requires institutions. As we've talked about in comparative politics courses or other IR courses, this includes independent courts, competitive parties, civil society networks, bureaucratic capacity, rule of law traditions. These develop slowly over time, often through internal political struggle. military force can degrade infrastructure, it can eliminate leadership, it can signal resolve. But it is difficult by itself to construct democratic institutions. This is the tension at the heart of democracy through force logic. We understand why the international community looks at the democratic peace theory and says more democracies are better than less democracies, because in theory they are more peaceful. In theory, their state power could be used for purposes other than military conflict. But building those institutions are what critics of democratic peace theory and critics of military intervention point to as hindrances of building these institutions, which historically have been built slowly over time. So we can understand why Israel and the United States would want a democratic Iran, for the reasons that maybe government officials are talking about today, or if we tap into political science literature, international relations literature, we can see why a democratic Iran might be more transparent, more institutionally constrained, more economically integrated, and potentially less ideologically revisionist. But getting there is where maybe theory and reality intersect, and it's hard at times to get those two things to align. Thank you.